Amen. Glad to have you here this morning. We're continuing on in our series on thinking outside the box as far as leadership is concerned. Today we're looking at how to resolve conflict. How to resolve conflict. We've been studying Nehemiah from the standpoint of leadership principles because no matter what situation you're in life, there's usually something you need leadership in. Whatever you're going through, usually there's some leadership you need to get out of it. And so we'll review some of the opposition that Satan has threw at Nehemiah in these earlier chapters in Nehemiah. In chapter 2, they first started by derision. They tried to laugh them out of doing the work. They made fun of them. They ridiculed them, put them down. Nehemiah's response to that was that he simply ignored it. He simply ignored it. When people ridicule you and put you down, what's the best thing to do? Just ignore it and keep about what you're doing. If you know you're doing the right thing. The second thing they tried was discouragement. They came and they said, you're tired. You're never going to be able to finish it. It's hopeless. There was about halfway through the project. There was a lot of rubble. We're going to come and kill you. We're going to... first, he said, you'll never finish it. There's too much rubble. They got them all discouraged. What was Nehemiah's response to discouragement? Should be your same response to discouragement. What he did, he simply reorganized. Reorganize, remember the Lord. He put people by families, strengthen their groups. Remember the Lord is with us and don't give in to discouragement. Next tactic they came along was danger. They said, we're going to kill you. We're going to come and kill you right where you're working at. They threatened them. The opposition who did not want the wall built, Sanballat and Tobiah, said, we're going to come and kill you guys when you're not looking. They threatened them. They tried to scare them into quitting. Here's Nehemiah's response to this. To that was to resist it. He resisted their response. He prepared. We're going to reinforce it. Half will build the wall and half will carry swords. Then they alternated in shifts. So they tried derision, discouragement, and danger. Today we're going to look at how they tried to use division and discord. Division and discord. But you've got to remember that's what exactly the enemy wants to do. If he can't get you from without, he tries to get you from within. So they tried to create an internal conflict. When you get people fighting each other, they're ineffective after that. So in chapter 4, the opposition from the outside. Chapter 5, you have the internal opposition. That's much more worse. The sabotaging from the inside. Satan tries all the time to divide us. He uses money as his typical, what he would love to use. He uses money a lot of times. More conflicts are caused by finances than anything else. The majority of divorce are because of financial problems. Satan is going to try to divide them over financial issues. The question, does the devil still use division today? Of course he does. Still one of his favorite tools is he uses division, internal problems. It destroys more churches than external problems. Internal problems destroy more churches than external problems. Mark 3:25 says, if a house is divided against itself, that house cannot stand. You ever see a football team defeat itself? I have. You get a big 2 or 3 guys with big egos and they think it's all about them. They begin to fight against themselves. They begin to sabotage and they don't do things right and they beat themselves. If you don't deal with conflict, then it's going to stop the work of the Lord in your life. If you're going to be a leader, you've got to learn how to resolve conflict. It's not fun, but you're going to have to. This chapter is very, very important. It teaches us conflict management. If you're ever going to climb the ladder where you work, and you're going to eventually be over different departments or different people, you're going to have to know how to do conflict management. And so we're going to look at this verse 1 through 5 gives us the cause of the conflict, and 6 through 13 gives us the cure of the conflict. First, let's look at the cause of the conflict. The background of this chapter is the people have been spending all their time working on the wall, pretty much around the clock. They didn't have enough time to cultivate their garden and raise food. Verse 1, now the men and their wives raised a great outcry against their Jewish brothers. Some were saying, we and our sons and daughters are numerous. In order for us to eat and stay alive, we must get grain. The first complaint was a food shortage. Too many mouths to feed. In the next verse we find out there was a famine also going on in the land. The resources and the goods were in short supply. There were more mouths to feed than they had food. Inflation and high prices had caused a food shortage. It is interesting, they are doing the work of God. You would think that if you're doing the work of God, everything else should be going great in your life. They were doing the work of God, yet God allowed famine. Why? Weren't they doing what He told them to do? I think that doing God's will does not exempt you from common problems in life. Just because you're doing the right thing doesn't mean your car isn't going to break down. It doesn't mean that you may not have a major health problem. So this is the same with the food shortage. This is something a bigger. We're individuals. We're in a church. We're in a community. We're in a state. We're in a country. And we may be in the favor of God individually. We may be in the favor of God church-wise, but we as a community may not be in the favor of God, or we may not be in the favor of God nationally. And so our whole country is going through famine because our country is not submitting itself to God in the right way. So there's different levels of favor and grace in God. But these people were doing God's will at that time, and because they were doing God's will, things are going to change in the future. But at that particular time, in spite of all that they were doing for God, there was some food shortages. The second thing is that they were over-mortgaged in their homes. You'd think you're reading today's newspaper. In verse 3 it said, we are mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, our homes to get grain during the famine. That's what I call financial bondage. They were using their equity to feed their families. They were taking their equity out of their homes and mortgaging them deeper and deeper just to have food to put on the table. Verse 4 says, still others were saying, we have to borrow money to pay the king's taxes on our fields and our vineyards. So we now find they have high taxes. That's the third problem. They were having to borrow just to pay taxes. They were in deep debt here. As a result, in verse 5, although we are the same flesh and blood as our countrymen, and though our sons are as good as theirs, yet we have to subject our sons and our daughters to slavery. Some of our daughters have already been enslaved, but we are powerless because our fields and our vineyards belong to others. They had to have food, so they first mortgaged their homes, and then they started selling off their family to raise money. In other words, if you couldn't pay your debt, your son or daughter would be taken into slavery. And they're in debt. They are forced to place their kids into slavery to pay their debt. Circle mortgaging. Circle borrowing. Circle enslaved. I think these things go together. They go together. They went together then. They go together now. The Bible is relevant. High taxes and high mortgage and high prices force us to work overtime. When people have to work overtime and you've got husband and wife working 40 and 50 hours a week, the myth that we can have it all is not true, folks. You cannot be a real quality parent. You can't take care of your finances, and you can't take care of your yards, and you can't take care of your houses and your everything that needs to be taken care of, working 50 hours a week to pay high taxes and high mortgage interest and high everything. We can't do it. And so we find our parenting skills slipping behind. We find our marital skills slipping behind. We're too tired to even put up with anything. And so in verse 1, no different than there is in other countries of the world today, and as there will be in America if America don't get on the right track, now the men and their wives raised a great outcry against the Jewish brothers. They were complaining about each other. The rich Jews were exploiting the poor Jews in a time of crisis. They were taking advantage and capitalizing on the misfortune of the poor people. Those who had money and had food were saying, if you will sell me your house, I'll give you food. I'll lend you some money, but it will be at a high interest rate. And if you can't pay the loan, I'll take your children as collateral. They were exploiting each other, even their own people. Rather than helping and giving to the poor, they were charging high interest and repossessing their homes, taking their children as slaves, total disregard for their misfortunes of the other people, only taking themselves, thinking about themselves, how can I take advantage of this problem? I want to tell you something. Not only was this wrong, it was against the law of God. In Exodus 2 and 25, said the Jews could not charge interest to each other. The Jews could charge interest to other nations, but they could not charge interest to their own people. God allowed the Jews to charge interest to other people, but they were not allowed to charge interest to each other. They could loan to each other, but they could not charge any interest on it. The Bible also said that the Jew was not to enslave another Jew. If somebody was poor, he could come and work for you, but you were not to make him your slave. They were clearly violating God's will. The rich were blatantly violating their laws of profiteering and exploiting and capitalizing on the famine. We have a conflict between the haves and the have-nots right in the middle of this building program. Here's Leadership Law 1. The root cause of internal conflict and discord is always selfishness. If you want to find out why there's discord in your job place or in wherever you're working, whatever you're trying to do, there's disunity, there's discord, it always leads back to selfishness. Whether it be marriage, whether it be family, it leads back to selfishness. Whether you have conflicts in your family, with your boyfriend, in the church, in your office, at school, the bottom line is conflict is always leads to selfishness. James 4:1 says, what causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desire that battles within you? You want something, but you don't get it. What causes conflict? Selfishness. When my wants conflict with your wants, we've got a problem. We're going to have some conflicts and division. The most fulfilling part of leadership is working with people. The most discouraging and frustrating part of leadership is working with people. I've often said, Pastor, it would be great if you didn't have to work with people. People tend to be selfish, including me. We all want what we want. We want it our way. We want to do our own thing. As a result, we don't always want to do the thing that's best for the whole. They put themselves first, and that can be very, very frustrating. We think of ourselves, and the cause of conflict, there again, is always selfishness. Then the cure for the conflict. Let's look at that. How does a leader resolve conflict? Nehemiah knew the whole thing could blow up in his face and the wall would never get rebuilt. They were exploiting each other. They had Jews fighting against Jews, families fighting against families. In verse 1, the men and their wives raised a great outcry. So here's step 1, verse 1. When I heard their outcry and these charges, I was very angry. I'm going to tell you, there is a time for a leader to get angry. I think I'm a very mild-mannered person. Even my temperament's very mild-mannered. But if you want to get me angry, then you cause disunity in the church. I have had people in my office before, and I've told them and read in the face, this church is not for you. You need to move on down the line. And it's because one of the chief aims of the church is a fellowship. The church needs to stay in unity. And if a church is not in unity, it's nothing. And there comes a time that righteous anger is the best response. And that's exactly what Nehemiah did not ignore the problem. He took it seriously. If you're the leader of any kind of group and the harmony of your group is being threatened, you better get angry. It's very, very important. You as a leader are to protect the harmony, the unity of your home, your group, your Sunday school, wherever you're working. Sometimes anger is very appropriate. Sometimes it's the right thing to do. The verse says in Nehemiah was very angry. You can circle very. Anger is even commanded by God. Ephesians 4:26 says, be angry and sin not. Jesus got angry. You can get angry and not sin. One of the first things you need to do if there's disharmony that is caused by selfishness, you as a leader better get angry. You better take it seriously. There's the right kind of anger and the wrong kind of anger. Leadership is knowing the difference between those two kind of angers. Nehemiah's anger is not a personal reaction. Nobody was hurting him personally. He's not getting angry and striking back because he's got a bruised ego. That's the wrong kind of anger. It was not about him. It was not about his self. He's not striking back in revenge. That's the wrong kind of anger. But what he is, he has a justification, a justifiable indignation. He was angry at the selfishness of the rich people. He deeply was disturbed by their exploitation. They could call a halt to the entire project just because of their own selfish greed. Nehemiah's thinking, what good is a wall if people inside the wall are ripping each other off? What good is a wall if we're exploiting each other? I'm going to tell you something. I don't care what nation it is, when a nation gets selfish and all they care about is them, there's a lot of selfishness went on in Wall Street. And I'm going to tell you, when people get that selfish, their heads will roll. They'll come. And it's not past the United States, people rising up and say, we're not putting up with this anymore. We're not putting up with high interest anymore. We're not putting up with government leaders that will not do the will of the people. No one is isolated from being overthrown if they're not following the right principles. It'll just happen. It'll happen. And so Nehemiah, the point is we need to get angry at sin. That kind of sin that will destroy homes and families and businesses and churches and schools. Louis Cassell says we're exposed daily to so much human tragedy. We've experienced what some have called compassion fatigue. Have you ever felt sorry for so many flood victims and earthquake victims and war victims that you simply cannot muster up any more sympathy? We know we ought to have fresh, all those fresh casualties all over the world. But even worse, the compassion fatigue, the indignation fatigue. See, after a while, you get exposed to so much, so often, that we can get complacent. We can get to the point that we just don't have any indignation anymore. We don't have any anger anymore. We don't have any compassion anymore. We've already laid it all out on the line. Many of us seem to have lost the capacity to get mad, at least as mad as we ought to get, about lying and cheating and stealing. I'm telling you, I hope America gets so mad they'll go to the polls. I hope people get so mad they'll kick the devil out of their homes. They'll get so mad they'll do something about their finances and they'll begin to isolate themselves from somebody else victimizing them and destroying them. To be indifferent to wrongdoing, to shrug it off and laugh at the symptom of advanced degeneration or moral sins. Someone seems to have administered a massive dose of Novocaine to our national conscience. And here Nehemiah was facing the same thing. He goes, I ain't putting up with this. The leader without some fire in his or her bones is not much of a leader. When you see something that is destroying the harmony of your family, your church, your nation, your business, the first thing you do as a leader is you get upset and you start making some changes. Nothing will upset a leader more than division. If you want to get called on the carpet at Grace, just cause division. Because that's one of my highest calling as a pastor of this church, is to stomp out any disunity. And that's the only thing I really get upset about. I am jealous for the harmony and the unity of this church. The last thing they needed during this time of building and getting on with the program of God was internal strife.
So the second thing that Nehemiah had to do, he had to do some reflection. He had to think before he speaks. I want you to do like this right here. You see me use that little thing there, and I want you to turn it upside down. Well, see, this right here represents E over I. Emotion over intellect. I'm going to tell you, when you get mad sometimes, when you get angry sometimes, your emotion is running wild. Man, I'm going to go tell that person. I'm going to tell them like it is. I'm going to give them a little piece of my mind. Don't we do that? Or is that just me? No, we do that because we're angry. But here's the thing. It's all right to be angry. It's all right to be upset. It's all right for your blood to be boiling a little bit. But before you go and you start approaching that person with the E, you need to wait until you get back where you're right. It's intellect over emotion. In other words, you've had time to reflect. You've had time to think about it. Now here's what Nehemiah did. If you only do step 1 and you don't do step 2, you're going to get in a lot of trouble. Verse 7, here's what Nehemiah did. I pondered them in my mind. The Living Bible said, so after thinking about it, circle this, I spoke out against these rich government officials. So he thought about it. He had a strategy. He thought about it. He wasn't just lashing out from the emotion. He was waiting until intellectually he knew what he was doing. These were people who were ripping everybody off. The Hebrew word is literally, I consulted with myself. You ever consulted with yourself? You ever talked to yourself? I'll tell you what, that just makes me so mad. I'm going to tell you what, I'm going to straighten that out when I get to work tomorrow. Somebody's going to be in trouble. Well, it's all right to talk to yourself. It's all right to consult yourself. Just keep consulting yourself until yourself gives you some wise counsel. Some of you is going to take longer than others. But it's all right to get upset when indignation and disharmony and plans are disrupted. Nehemiah's first reaction was to get angry. But before he did anything else, he talked to himself about it. And he got along and he talked to God about it. And he'd done that until he got the right perspective on it. Sometimes you have to get over here, okay, if I was in their shoes, how would I feel about being approached this way? And if I was in their shoes, how would I feel about being approached this way? What is their angle? What is their selfish area they're guarding? Why are they guarding it? And you want to look at all these different angles. When you go in there, you don't go in there blindly. You don't approach somebody the wrong way. And so he's very smart. So he planned out and he said, God, what do you want me to say? He talked to himself. There are some times when leaders need to talk to themselves. You don't need to go talk to anyone else. You need to sit down and you need to say, what really is going on here? I'm ticked off, I'm irritated, I'm upset. Sometimes when you're ticked off and irritated and upset, it's because somebody said something to you that there's a lot of truth in. If somebody makes me real angry, sometimes it's because there's some truth in what they're saying. But what's really happening? Set aside some time for reflecting. Because when you get angry, your first reaction is usually the wrong one because it's E over I. It's emotion over intellect. James 1:19 and 20 says, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. For man's anger does not bring about the righteous life God desires. This is the antidote. It's not a contradiction. It's a clarification of what Ephesians said. Be angry and sin not. There is a difference between man's anger and God's anger. Man's anger is when we act in revenge. God's anger is when we act in righteousness. There's no personal vendetta involved. I'm not going to get angry because you hurt me. You irritated me. You frustrated me. You disappointed me. That's the wrong kind of anger. See, it's dealing with self. Your anger is out of your own selfishness when you do that. What he's saying is be quick to listen and slow to speak. If you do these first two, the third one will automatically happen. If you're quick to listen and you're slow to speak, then you will also be slow to anger. And, that's the thing. You haven't just spouted off whatever first came to your mind. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't emotional. That just gets you in trouble. I've seen a lot of leaders who are very effective for the Lord, but in a moment of impulse blew it all. They lost their credibility because they didn't do what Nehemiah done in this area right here. So step 2 is reflection. A good antidote or qualifier of this step 1, the reaction of getting angry. You need some reflection time. The third thing is rebuke. You privately confront the offending party. Go directly to the source. You don't deal with somebody else about by talking to some 5 or 6 other people. Our tendency is to go, I'll tell you what they did, and I'll tell you what they did, and I'll tell you what they did. Folks, you're becoming a part of the problem. You go directly to the source. You don't say, I've got a prayer request. I mean, knows a prayer request sometimes is sanctified gossip. I want you to pray for Sally Benchfield because I understand right now she's running off to Gatlinburg and get married. Some guy she met the other day. Is that a prayer request or is that just sanctified gossip? Sometimes we can say, I'm really concerned about this person because I think and all it is sanctified gossip. It's just gossiping. You're not really concerned. You're passing on something because you're personally offended by something they've done to you. If somebody has offended you, you go to somebody else because besides them first, you have already sinned. An example, Nehemiah 5 and 7, I pondered them in my mind, then I accused the nobles and the officials. I told them, you are exacting usury, which is the word interest, from your own countrymen. He goes to them directly to the problem. He's going directly to the people that are sinning. In Matthew 18, 15, and 17, Jesus was also telling people how to handle conflict. He says, wherever you are, if your brother sins against you, go show him his fault just between the two of you. If he listens to you, you've won your brother over. But if he will not listen, take 1 or 2 others along so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. If he still refuses to listen, tell the church. And if he refuses to listen even to the church, treat him as you would a pagan or a tax collector. I like that. How did Jesus tell us to treat pagans and tax collectors? He said we're to love them, but we're not to treat them like brothers. There's a big difference. There's a big difference between acceptance and approval. Only involve the people and limit it to the people that are involved. First, go to the person. Try to resolve it with your boss or whoever. If that doesn't work, take another person along. If that doesn't work, get a larger group. Bring the church. But it doesn't say first go tell the whole church about that person. You go to that person first. Notice Nehemiah 5 and 7. I pondered them in my mind and then I accused. Circle accused. Nehemiah is not making a polite social visit here. His anger, he's not glossing it over. He absolutely went to the rich people. He went to the high-class officials, and he's accusing them of ripping off their own countrymen, their own family, their own Jewish people. Step 3, privately confront the offender. How many of you like to confront people? If you like to confront people, something's wrong with you. I've been telling you. I mean, you may can do it. Some temperaments are better than do it than others. I don't like to confront people. It's not fun. I've never enjoyed confronting people. Have I had to do it a lot in the ministry? Absolutely. People who like to confront have a problem. It's not fun. Some of you, because of your very nature of your job, you've had to learn to do it, and you can do it, and you do it very well. But I hate confronting people. I want everybody to like me. I don't want to be disliked. I don't want to cause hard feelings. I've learned, though it's necessary to confront for the good of everybody else. I've also learned if I don't confront, the problem in the church is going to get worse. It don't get better. I've also learned that the longer I wait, the more courage it takes to confront. You kind of get chicken if you wait too long. Have you ever seen the morale of an office go down because, one jerk is there and he's just doing anything he wants to do? A lot of times that jerk is usually bringing in the most money. He's the best salesman. Or he's been there the longest. He has the most influence. And he's got to a point he's totally disrespectful to those because he thinks it's all about him now. Even that person has to be taken down a notch every once in a while. Have you ever seen a family fall apart because the parents were afraid to discipline their own kids? They were afraid that if they really disciplined them, they would lose them. That's tough love, and it's tough, but sometimes it needs to be done. Here's leadership law. Leaders must have the courage to confront. Can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen. If you're ever going to be a leader, then you have to develop skills of confrontation. You must have courage to confront. Speak the truth in love. Leadership requires courage. Leadership is not a popularity contest. It's lonely at the top. Every time you make a decision, every time I make a decision, I know some's going to like it, some are not. The leader has to have courage. You have to understand that there's going to be a fallout. I'm going to confront this issue head on. Let the chips fall where they may. For the greater good of the family, for the greater good of the business, for the greater good of the church, for the greater... I don't care, but I want you to know something. If you do it, some's going to like it, some's not. And that's what Nehemiah was doing here. He said, I'm going to deal with this issue because it needs to be dealt with. It needs to be dealt with. We need some men of courage leading this country today. Titus 3:10 and 11. Pastors and others are commanded to warn troublemakers. Warn a derisive person once, then warn him a second time. After that, have nothing to do with him. You may be sure that such a man is warped and sinful. He is self-condemned. One of the tasks of leadership is warning troublemakers. You might have to go to somebody, you think you're going to cause trouble here on our job, but you're not. I'm going to be like Barney 5, I'm going to nip it in the bud. I'm going to tell you what, every time anybody, God gives you a dream, He gives you a vision, He gives you a strategy, a style. I even realize about this church. This church, we do things different from other churches. It doesn't make us more special, but this is the vision God has given us, is to do church the way we're doing it. And you know, there's some churches, they do their vision. You know, I'm sure they do their vision better than us, but I don't believe there's a church in Cumberland County that does our vision better than we do it. And sometimes people come here and they go, well, you know, the way we used to do it at our church. Or you may have some northerners move in here and go, the way we used to do it up north. Nobody likes to be done that way. Step 4, resolution. Publicly deal with the public division. You know, if it's private, deal with it privately. If they brought it to the public, you deal with it publicly. Obviously, in this situation, everybody knew what was happening. The rich people were ripping off the poor people. It had to be dealt with publicly. You deal with things publicly to the degree that they are known. If it's a personal sin, you confess it personally to God. If it's a private sin between you and another person, you confess it privately between you and that other person. If it's a gross out whole church, then you deal with it publicly. In verse 7, I pondered them in my mind, and then I accused the nobles and the officials. I told them, you're exacting usury from your own countrymen. This was a private part, and then eventually that wasn't enough. So I called together a large meeting to deal with them. I said, as far back as possible, we have bought back our Jewish brothers who were sold to the Gentiles. Now you are selling your brothers only for them to be sold back to us, and they kept quiet because they could not find anything to say. Nothing to say. Nehemiah is publicly rebuking them. He says in the Persia, I was a cupbearer, and I used to use my personal wealth to buy Jews out of slavery. And I come home to my hometown, to my capital, to my Jerusalem, and you're selling Jews into slavery of their own people. This doesn't make sense. He said, it is inconsistent. Why are you doing this sin? buying your own brothers and sisters in order to make profit. You obviously know what Leviticus says, what is illegal for you to do, what you're doing. Do you imagine that Nehemiah was nervous here? You can count on him being nervous. You ever have to confront people? It's usually gut-wrenching. He publicly took on the city leaders. He is rebuking the wealthy owners of Jerusalem, the very people he probably needed funding from. Now, who would pay for the walls? Who would care for the poor? Who would pay for the doors? The people who didn't even have enough money for the food. No, they're not going to do it. He's going to need these money bags, these very people, for the funding of the walls. The devil is probably saying, Nehemiah, if you call this public meeting, you're going to lose every bit of the support that it's going to take to pay for the wall. But Nehemiah was committed to doing the right thing, regardless. If it meant putting the wall on hold, he's going to do the right thing. You know, when it comes down to integrity, Nehemiah had integrity, and the right thing is the right thing, folks. I've had people flash money in front of my face and say, I'll give this money to this church if you'll do this. And I had to say, there's some offering boxes in the back. If you want to give it, you put it there. But we're not going to do what you want to do, because it goes against the vision and the direction of this church, and we will not turn in that direction. And they walked out of here with a lot of money. It doesn't matter. It would have destroyed our church way back when. But Nehemiah was committing to doing the right thing, regardless. If it meant putting the wall on hold, he would do it. Verse 9, so I continued what you are, he said, so I continue, what you are doing is not right. Shouldn't you walk in the fear of God to avoid the reproach of your Gentile enemies? He's appealing to their consciousness. He's saying what you're doing is a bad testimony. All unbelievers are laughing. Those people are supposed to be godly people, and they're buying and selling each other into slavery and ripping off each other. Folks, there comes a time when the consciousness of America needs to rise. We can't accuse other nations of things that we're doing ourselves. Discord is always a poor testimony. When a church gets a reputation for fighting and fussing, they lose their effectiveness. Like these little kids were outside and they were fussing and carrying on, and the mother yelled out the window and said, y'all quit that out there. The little kids said, we're just playing church. Verse 10. He said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to give back to them immediately. My brothers and my men are also lending people money and grain, but not for interest. But let the exacting of usury stop. Quit charging your own people interest. Give back to them immediately their fields and their vineyards, their olive groves and their houses, also the usury you're charging them, and the 100th part of the money, grain, and new wine and oils. The interest was 100th part of what was paid monthly. 1% a month equals 12%, and in that time, 12% interest was unheard of. And he said the result was, what happened when he approached them the right way, in a godly way, with their godly conscience? In verse 12, and they said, they repented. We will give it back, they said. And we will not demand anything more from them. We will do as you say. Nehemiah must have breathed a sigh of relief at that point. That was quite a gamble to challenge the people, those wealthy owners. Nehemiah did not take any chances. He wasn't just going to take their word for it. Then I summoned the priest. You know, Nehemiah's pretty smart. Talk is cheap. So here's what I'm going to do. He summoned the priest and made the nobles and the officials take an oath to do what they had promised. He didn't just let them get away with saying they would do it. He wanted them to make an oath to God and the priest that they were going to do it. Then Nehemiah, with a dramatic flair, gives an object lesson, a dramatic presentation. You know, Nehemiah had this, they had like a cloak or like an apron, and he probably had all his tools and stuff in it, and Nehemiah just took his apron and shook it all out. And here's what he told them. After they had done this, I shook out the folds of my robe and said, in this way may God shake out of his house the possessions any man who does not keep his promise. Nehemiah he said, I'm going to tell you something. You've made a promise now before these people. You've made a promise before the priest and God. And if you do not keep this, he said, I pray that you be shaken out of God's people. He's serious, folks. Step 5, the reinforcement. The reinforcement. He sets an example of unselfishness. We see this down in verse 14. We're going to cover it even more so later on in this series. But he led by example. He always led by example. When he was asked them to pray, he has already been praying. When he asked them to stay up all night, he was staying up all night, all day, to build the wall. When he asked them to help the poor, he had already helped the poor. You know, there's something wrong when our government is asking us to do things they're not willing to do. Something wrong when leaders are asking other people to do things they're not willing to do. In verse 13, such a man be shaken out and empty. At this time the whole assembly said amen and praised the Lord. And the people did as they promised in verse 14. Here's a little biographical statement here. When I was appointed governor in the land of Judah, neither I nor my brothers ate the food allotted to the governor. In other words, Nehemiah was the governor and they were supposed to bring him food because he was the governor. That was a part of his, you'd say, his dividends or his pay. But Nehemiah said, I can't eat the food. I won't eat the food when there's been such a heavy burden placed on the people. And he took 40 shekels of silver in addition to the food and wine. The assistants also lorded it over the people. But out of the reverence of God, I didn't act like those others. I devoted myself to the work on the wall. All my men were assembled there for the work. I didn't acquire any land. Furthermore, 150 Jews and officials ate at my table as those who came to us from surrounding nations. Each day 1 ox, 6 sheep, and some poultry were prepared for me. And 10 days an abundant supply of wine and all these kinds. In spite of all this, I never demanded the food allotment to the governor because the demands were heavy on these people. He led by example. You'll never be a leader unless you lead by example. Nehemiah was a model of unselfishness. Why did he say that right at the end of all this stuff about conflict? Because the source of all conflict is selfishness. And he's saying, I've never led by selfishness. I would never require of you something I wouldn't be willing to do myself. Paul was a leader like this in 1 Corinthians 11:1. Paul said, follow me, follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. You might say, well, I would never say that. I would never tell anybody to follow me as I follow Christ. Well, I'm going to tell you something. If somebody can't look at your life and follow you as you follow Christ, you need to change some things in your life. If I can't tell people to follow me as I follow Christ, I need to change some things in my life. We are all supposed to be models and examples. Leadership law is this. Leaders only ask others to do what they're already doing. That's the secret of Nehemiah's boldness. He's got boldness because he's doing all the stuff he tells them to do. He could stand up and he could challenge them to feed the poor because he'd been feeding the poor. He could stand up and he could say, follow my example, because he was an example. What's your responsibility? If Grace is your family, Ephesians 4:3, I'm going to give you your primary job description as being a member of Grace. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. There is no higher calling for any of us in the church than unity. In fact, internal differences. Whatever you've got, a group of people. And folks, there will be differences because we're all different. There'll be some things that people will like. Some will not like us going to Saturday night service. Some didn't like us going to first service. But folks, we've got to reach more people for the gospel. We've got to find more time for people to be able to tune in and get a hold of Christ. We've got to reach out and win the lost. If we're not going to do it now, when we're going to do it? Jesus said, by this shall all men know that you're my disciples, that you love one another. The greatest thing a church can do is love one another. I tell husbands and wives, the greatest example you can give your children is loving each other. And it's true. Vance Abner said, snowflakes are frail, but enough of them can stick together and stop traffic. I'm telling you, as we move into growing as a church, and we move into 3 services, or 4 services, or 5 services, and as we even think about maybe branching out and doing some other churches in other areas, it's going to take unity. Because the devil's going to fight at every move he possibly can. Because he don't want us to grow. He don't want us to reach the lost. He don't want us to change the world. But we can, by God's grace and God's help. I want us to bow our heads at this time. You know, one way that you can know that you're standing in that place of integrity and you're doing what God tells you, you'll find a peace come over you. Paul realized that. Paul may have been sitting in jail, but he knew he was sitting in jail because he was obeying God. And he had been called to suffer many things for His name's sake. A lot of times following the will of God does not mean prosperity. It means hardship. It means labor. It means doing the right thing. If God calls you to lead anything in this town, in this country, in this world, there'll be some opposition if you try to do the right thing. But you need to do it anyway. You need to do it anyway. But Paul said, the God of all peace shall bruise Satan shortly under my feet. You know, when you do what Nehemiah did, you really think about it. Am I doing this out of selfish motive? Or am I doing this because this is what is best for the people I work for? Then you know you can stand at peace that you're doing the right thing. There's no selfish motive involved in it. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, I pray that as you lead these people in this congregation to be the problem solvers, the people that resolve conflicts, the people that causes the workplace to go, the family to find harmony and unity. Lord, there'll be many challenges, there'll be many oppositions, there'll be many conflicts. But Lord, I pray that we'd rid our own selves of any selfishness. That we would search our souls, that we're not just doing it for our own selfish good, but we're doing what we're doing. We would even face the opposition, we'd even face the conflict for the greater good of the whole. God, I pray that you'd give us peace. Peace in our heart, peace in our soul, that we're doing the right thing for the Lord Jesus Christ. In Jesus' name we pray. If you'd like to give this ministry, give an offering boxes in the back in the lobby. Have a great day, folks. It's going to be a beautiful one. God bless you.